Look closer. Inside this incredibly common object is a secret. A tiny, perfect sphere, less than a millimeter wide, held in a socket with microscopic precision. This little ball is responsible for one of the biggest revolutions in modern history. It ended a centuries-long tyranny of smudges, leaks, and constant dipping. But the story of how it got there? It's a wild tale of frustrated genius, a desperate escape from war, a brash American salesman who made millions overnight and then lost it all when the pen started to fail. This isn't just the pen, it's a story of obsession, betrayal, and the unlikely birth of the single most successful writing tool ever created. For thousands of years, writing was messy. From reeds to quills, we relied on dipping a sharp point into a pot of liquid ink. It was slow, it was inconvenient, and it was unforgiving. One wrong move in your work was ruined. The fountain pen, invented in the 19th century, was a huge step up. It had its own ink reservoir, no more dipping. But it wasn't perfect. The water-based ink took time to dry, smudging easily. The nibs were delicate and could be damaged by pressure, and most frustratingly, they leaked. Everyone from students to businessmen knew the pain of an inky pocket. The world needed something better, and the idea for it came from a very unlikely place. Meet Laszlo Biro, a Hungarian journalist in the 1930s. Biro was constantly frustrated by his fountain pen, but one day, visiting a newspaper printer, he had a moment of inspiration. He noticed that the ink used to print newspapers was thick, oily, and dried almost instantly. He thought, what if I could put that kind of ink in a pen? He tried, and it was a complete failure. The thick, viscous ink wouldn't flow down to the tip of a fountain pen. It just sat there, a stubborn blob. He needed a totally new delivery system, and legend has it, he found the answer watching children play in the street. A marble rolled to a puddle of water, and as it came out the other side, it left a clean, consistent line of water on the dry pavement. That was the light bulb moment. What if the tip of the pen wasn't a nib, but a tiny, free-rotating ball bearing? The ball would sit in a tiny socket. As you write, the ball would roll. One side would pick up the thick ink from the reservoir inside the pen, and the other side would roll it onto the paper. It was genius. The ball would act as a cap, preventing the thick ink from drying out, while also distributing it evenly. With his brother Georgie, a chemist, they got to work. They had to solve two huge problems. First, formulating an ink with the perfect viscosity, thick enough to not leak, but thin enough to flow. Second, engineering a socket that held the tiny ball perfectly, snug enough to not fall out, but loose enough to roll freely. By 1938, they had a working prototype. The Biro pen was born. But just as they were ready to change the world changed on them. Biro was Jewish in a Hungary that was increasingly aligning with Nazi Germany. Fearing for their lives, the Biro brothers had to flee. They escaped to Paris, and then, with the Nazi invasion looming, all the way to Argentina. It was in Buenos Aires that they filed a new patent in 1943 and started a small factory. But their pen had a problem. It relied on gravity to feed the ink down to the ball. This meant you had to hold it almost perfectly upright to write. It was better, but not perfect. Their big break came from an unexpected customer, the British Royal Air Force. Fountain pens were a disaster for pilots. At high altitudes, the change in air pressure would cause them to leak uncontrollably, ruining maps and documents. The Biro pen, with its thick ink, didn't have this problem, and it could write on more surfaces. The British government placed an order for 30,000 pens for its air crews. The Ballpoint pen had helped win a war. Now, it was about to enter a battle of its own. The story now shifts to America and to a man named Milton Reynolds. Reynolds was a Chicago salesman, a classic American hustler. He saw a Biro pen in a store in Buenos Aires and immediately recognized its potential. But he didn't want to license the technology, he wanted to own it. He flew back to the US, and in a stroke of cunning, he realized he didn't need to copy Biro's exact patent. The basic idea of a ballpoint writing instrument had been patented decades earlier by an American inventor named John J. Loud, who wanted to write on leather and wood. That patent had long since expired, so he could legally create his own version. He re-engineered the Biro pen, made a few small changes to avoid patent infringement, and rushed to market. He called it the Reynolds Rocket, and his marketing was pure genius. He claimed it was the first pen to write underwater. It would last for years without a refill. It was the pen of the atomic age. On October 29, 1945, he launched the Reynolds Rocket exclusively at Gimbel's department store in New York City. He priced it at $12.50. That's over $200 in today's money for a pen. The public went insane. Thousands of people flooded the store. Police had to be called in for crowd control. On that first day alone, Gimbel sold over 10,000 pens. In the first few months, Milton Reynolds became a multi-millionaire. The ballpoint pen was a smash hit, the American dream in a shiny tube. And then, it all fell apart. The Reynolds Rocket was a rushed product. It leaked, the ink skipped, the balls would get stuck. It was a novelty, but not a reliable tool. Within a year, the market was flooded with cheap, shoddy imitations, and the public's love affair with the ballpoint pen turned sour. The fad was over. Reynolds' company folded a few years later. It seemed like the ballpoint pen was destined to be a failed gimmick, but across the Atlantic, in France, another man had been watching this whole saga. His name was Marcel Bitch. Bitch was a maker of pen parts. He was methodical, patient, and a perfectionist. He saw the potential of the ballpoint, but he also saw why it failed. The manufacturing was imprecise. He bought the patent from Biro, who was struggling in Argentina, and for 2 years, Bitch obsessed over perfecting the design. His goal was simple: to create a ballpoint pen that worked flawlessly every single time, and to make it so cheap that it could be thrown away. He used Swiss watchmaking tools to machine the tip. The ball itself, made of tungsten carbide, had to be perfect. The socket holding it had to have tolerances of 1/100th of a millimeter. He developed an ink that was the perfect consistency. It never leaked, never clogged, and never dried. In 1950, he launched his creation. He called it the Bic Cristal. He dropped the H from his name to avoid a potentially awkward English pronunciation. The design was an act of pure functional genius. The transparent barrel let you see how much ink was left, solving a major customer anxiety. The hexagonal shape was borrowed from a wooden pencil, so it was familiar to hold and wouldn't roll off a table. And that tiny hole in the side of the barrel, that's to equalize the air pressure inside and outside the pen to prevent leaks. And the cap even had a hole in the top, a safety feature added later to prevent choking if it was accidentally swallowed. And the price? About 29 cents. The Bic Cristal wasn't launched with a spectacular marketing blitz. It was launched with quality and reliability. It just worked. It slowly and surely conquered the world. Today, the Bic Cristal is the best-selling pen in history. Over 100 billion have been sold. It's so iconic, it's in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. The ballpoint pen had finally fulfilled its destiny. It wasn't as a luxury item, but as a masterpiece of cheap, reliable, mass-produced design. It democratized writing. Anyone could afford to own a pen that worked. Of course, the story has one more famous chapter. the space race. Just like for RAF pilots, fountain pens were useless in zero gravity. The ink wouldn't flow. For early missions, NASA astronauts used pencils, but pencil tips can break off and float around the cabin, a dangerous hazard for sensitive electronic equipment. An American inventor named Paul Fisher spent $1 million of his own money developing a solution: the Fisher Space Pen. It used a pressurized ink cartridge. A nitrogen cartridge pushed the thick, gel-like ink towards the ballpoint. It could write upside down, underwater, in extreme temperatures, and yes, in zero gravity. NASA tested and approved the pen, and it was used on the Apollo missions. It became a symbol of Cold War-era innovation. A common myth says the Americans spent $1 million developing it, while the Soviets just used a pencil. It's a great story, but it's not true. The Soviets also bought Fisher's pens for their own space program. So, from a frustrated journalist in Hungary, to a daredevil salesman in New York, to a meticulous perfectionist in France, the journey of the ballpoint pen was anything but straightforward. It's a story about the relentless pursuit of a better way. The idea itself wasn't enough. It took the perfect ink, the perfect engineering, and the perfect business model to turn a leaky, unreliable gadget into the most dominant writing instrument on the planet. The next time you grab a pen to jot down a note, just look at it for a second. That simple, disposable object in your hand is the final chapter of a dramatic, decades-long story. This story is the perfect reminder that even the most common objects we own have unseen journeys filled with drama and genius. So, what everyday object do you think has a hidden story we should investigate next? Let us know in the comments below. Until then, keep your ideas flowing.